On behalf of the Cinema Audio Society, Motion Picture Sound Editors, and Post New York Alliance, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight for this celebration of sound, and more importantly, the artists that create the sound that you've been enjoying for years. Yeah. And I am going to quickly pass this off to Resident Academy Award winner Skip Levsey.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm not used to being on this side of the microphone, so without further ado, I'm going to ask Midge to get it started. And would you mind all explaining who you are and how you got here, and if you went to university or not? Is particularly interesting to me as well.
Okay, great. So I have a microphone. Yeah, sorry. No. Yeah, we'll switch.
Speak really loud.
Hi. So yeah, I'm Midge Costin, and I am a professor at USC Film School now, and I teach sound design, sound editing. I am here tonight because my movie is going to play, which I've been trying to do this movie for a long time. Actually, we worked for 9 years on it this time, but because there wasn't fair use, so I did a documentary called Making Waves, The Art of Cinematic Sound, and it is about sound editing and sound design and the history of sound, you'll see. And I started it back in 2002. I actually researched it, but there was no fair use, meaning I couldn't use clips, and I knew I needed to do clips. Has anyone ever tried to Skip, have you ever tried to read a book on sound? It's like, they don't make sense to me. I don't even know what they're talking about.
Yes,
and
I'm in a bunch of those. Hang on.
I had a career in sound, but my sound, what I tell my students is that the way that I got into sound was I really wanted to be a picture editor. When I was in film school, it was like sound. I used to get panic attacks doing sound because I felt like it was technical. And the guy who normally taught it was on sabbatical that first year. And so I just didn't get it. I didn't get it in terms of story and character. And instead, it just seemed like something you did at the end, and it was technical. And so I came out wanting to work as an apprentice and assistant editor, picture editor, and then I still had my thesis left to do. If anyone can relate to that. And I was finishing that film, but I needed money. I needed some more funding. And so someone that I had worked with at film school, some of you might know him, Dan Hageman, but he had become a sound editor, and he called me up one day and said, Midge, now he's working at a sound house, Chameleon Sound House, Chameleon. And he said, Midge, none of the union guys will touch the 16 millimeter film as opposed to 35, which we were doing. Film. None of these union guys will touch 16. Come in and I'll show you how to cut effects. You can cut the effects and I'll cut the dialogue. And so I always tell my students, I lowered myself and took a sound job. And that's how it began. And then soon into it, here I am like, oh, I'm responsible, for this. It's like, let's see, what would their world sound like? And what's the mood and the tone that I want to set? And how do I reflect character? And I don't know but it slowly, it started to, and not that slowly, and I realized, wow, sound can really make a difference. And so I'm a born-again sound editor. I was just born to make this film. And I'm just like, and the other thing that kept me, I think, interested there for a while too, I was one of the few women who was cutting effects. There were a lot more women were cutting dialogue and Foley, and CeCe's one of those big exceptions. But there were Beth Sterner and Julia Evershade.
Kay Rose.
Kay Rose was the big one. And Vicky, Terry Dorman. So Terry Eckner, a lot of people up north actually. But so. So that was kind of really fun, and I, was doing the action adventure in the late '80s and the '90s, and it just felt like an all new, And we had those big crews, and there were much bigger budgets at the time, a little bit bigger, longer schedules, but and it was really really fun. And and then one day I woke up and I thought, I don't even like these films that I'm working on. They were all the big action adventure movies, and I thought. And I love to teach, to tell you the truth. It's like my first love. So I thought, what, I can teach it to students who are going to go out and do better things with the skills that I can teach them, here, use it on your films and make better films than the things I'm working on. So, that's how it all began.
Film degree?
But yeah, I did. I went to USC and got my graduate degree there. And,
CeCe?
Hi. I didn't go to film school. Actually, I started so long ago, kind of before most of you were born, 75, 76. There were no film school. Well, there were a few, but they were all in Europe. Okay. And I eventually moved to Los Angeles, and I wanted to be a picture editor. And so I got little picture editing jobs. And then what happened is that I started doing sound because I couldn't find anybody to do it. Nobody wanted to do it. And it was indeed a kind of lowly, looked down upon job. But what happened was that I really loved it. I loved doing the sound. And I started doing more of it, and people would pay me money. And I thought that was good. One thing led to another, and this kind of, this is not really the question, but kind of comes under the heading of no job is too small. I was doing independent films, and there was a guy that came in at night, and he was cutting a Western, and I had done a Western. None of you are going to know this, but I had done a Western that Fred Williamson had made, who was a famous football player, I think called The Hammer, something like that.
Fred the Hammer Williamson.
Right. And I loved it. I had a great time doing it. And then this guy would come in at night, and he was editing this picture, and I would make a pot of coffee at 6 o'clock, and that's when I'd really start cutting. And that habit never changed. I cut from like 6 until 1 o'clock in the morning. And so he came over and he talked to me, and he said, "Oh, I saw some of your movies. He said, you did a good job. I'm cutting a Western. Would you like to do it?" And I did it, and we mixed it at Go Millions, which we called Go 100 because it was so low rent. And but we learned a lot, and I made lifelong friends there. I like to say I started at the top because there were 2 editors working there that I got a lot of advice from, and they were Richard Anderson and Steve Flick, who were like fantastic. And the librarian was Terry Ecton, who's an amazing editor, and the transfer guy was Alan Splett. So I really did start at the top.
Wait, and your friend who was doing the movie
Exactly.
was?
Yeah. And so I did this Western for him, and he thought I did a really good job. And he said, "Did you ever think about working at a studio?" And I said, "No, why would I want to do that?" And he said, "Well, if you'd like to come to Paramount, I could get you an interview." And it turned out he was a post-production executive moonlighting at Paramount. And that's how I wound up at Paramount 30-something years ago. So that's how it all started. And no, I did not go to film school. But I had a friend who went to film school who's here with me tonight. And I hung out with him for a year in London while he went to film school. And I was very, very influenced by that. And I thought, I can do this. I want to do this. I want to be involved in movie making because I loved it and still do.
But your friend who you worked with was George?
I worked with George Waters on a lot of projects. We did a lot of big action movies together. And then we both did separate projects during that time as well.
And so the Paramount executive who you worked with on that Western?
The Paramount executive that I worked for doing the Western was George Waters Sr., who was George's dad. And he was a big post-production executive at Paramount. And he was also a really well-known picture editor. He was a terrific picture editor. So it worked out okay.
Fantastic.
Good beginning.
Karol?
Karol Urban. I'm a re-recording mixer. So I think I got into sound and was interested in sound because I have really bad eyes. No, sincerely, I had a muscular deformity when I was born, and I was legally blind until the age of 5. And I also had like a bunch of joint issues, and I'm like fine wine. I'm doing much better as I've gotten older. But I was always very, very interested in sound because it was what made sense to me, and it was what I understood. And to this day, I think I'm quite good, and I love making something appear as if it's coming from somewhere else or around a corner, or I like the little details in dialogue that make things sound natural and airy, a scream that really feels like a scream, or a whisper that really feels like a whisper, and when somebody walks off, that just amount of trail that makes them feel real, but you can hear everything that's going on. The slight group in Wallach that gives you that little bit of exposition, but is not really in your face. It's all those little things that I feel like I have possibly observed because I have the world's worst depth perception ever. Like I'm like the Saturday Night Live skit. I'm really bad. So that's why I do what I do. I've been really lucky to do it. I did go to school. I started off in the DC area on the East Coast. So I was one of these all-in-one people. I started off being one of those editor, mixer, recordist folk. I did everything but production sound. And it gave me a great foundation. 12 years into my career, I moved to Los Angeles, where it was recommended to me that if I wanted to have the narrative challenges that I sought, that I would need to pick a specialty. And so I picked dialogue, music, re-recording mix, and it is the best job ever. It is so wonderful. Every day I get to go to work, and it's amazing. I get to work with wonderful people and craft stories. And I went to James Madison University. I do have a bachelor's in science. The audio post-production component to my degrees are, I believe it's called the School of Media Arts and Design Audio Post-Production, I believe is what it says. And it was kind of a convergence degree. And even though it was well over 20 years ago, they were foreseeing a convergence of the media even at that time. And it's actually, I really feel the reality of that is happening maybe in the last 5 years, but it is a happening. So yeah, it's kind of my tale, yeah.
Cheryl?
So I am one of those all-in-one people. Karol and I were the only two female all-in-one people and audio people in DC at one time, and now she's left me. Anyway, so I'm a re-recording mixer designer primarily. I also own my own facility, and we just built a new Atmos room. I primarily focus on nonfiction. That's kind of my niche. Big immersive experience, 4D, 3D experiences, work in museums around the country, as well as a lot of documentary. I found my way not through school, even though I wish I had. I just stumbled along until one day I figured out I'm not a composer, I'm a mixer. And I stumbled along until I found somebody who was willing to let me work for free so I could learn the gear, taught myself the gear, found out that, oh my gosh, I'm an engineer. I'm not a composer. Well, I'm a very bad composer, but I'm a better engineer. So I just kind of kept on finding those opportunities, worked in New York here for a while, and moved back to DC to raise my family and opened my own studio in 2006. No film school for me. I kind of wish that, that existed for me, but it didn't. So, but yeah.
Where? In DC area do you live?
I live in Kensington, Maryland. They're trying to call us North Bethesda now, but I'm fighting it with everything I have. And Karol understands that.
Right?
Silver Spring, Maryland is where the studio is. But I'm really trying to be location agnostic. We've built the studio to be location agnostic. We've built systems to be remote review, work within a millisecond of anywhere in the world. And I also travel quite a bit to work. So I'm really focusing on that and working with people I want to work with rather than the location driving my work. And so far it's working. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I would say, Deborah?
Hi, I'm Deborah Wallach, and it's nice to be on a panel with such impressive women. Yeah, very, very nice. I went to art school. I did not go to film school. I was looking for work, and I had some friends who were editors in picture, and they helped me, fake my way into a couple of jobs where I spent most time running to the phone booth and calling and saying, what is that brown stuff? And what do you do? And how do you sync up dailies? And so, yeah, I learned by doing. I came out of picture. I was mostly in documentary in the beginning. And during those documentaries, I always loved doing the sound as well. So that was just part of it. And I was taught and mentored that you really have to make the sound work first, worry about the picture later, especially in documentaries, because you're telling a story, and if you don't have all the sound there, you could always figure out something for the picture, but you had to get the sound. And so that was my first love, and I went through that, and then I switched to narrative for a couple of jobs. And after my daughter was born, I realized that I couldn't have someone over my shoulder all the time, so I switched over to ADR. And it seemed like I had a good disposition for that, because then I felt it was between picture editing and sound, and had a lot to do with storytelling. And being from New York, the directors I was really fortunate to work with were story-oriented, dialogue-oriented. So being able to affect how a story is told, and the nuances that are involved in any dialogue in ADR storytelling is so important. And so I was really taught by what I feel are the best people in how to direct, it was a time when we were given a lot of freedom to do whatever you felt, because there was time, there was budgets, and you could bring whatever your creativity was to it. So I felt fortunate about that. And then somewhere in the years of that, I loved doing the ADR, but I was missing the documentary world, and I couldn't go back into picture editing, so I started supervising documentary work, where you do most everything, and I've loved that. And it's like going back to a roots, and you're learning about something, and so that's kind of it. That's it, right?
Very good. Baihui?
My name is Baihui, and I'm the one that got the crazy name. So professionally, I use Baihui because it's easier. I was born raised in China, and I studied recording arts without actually knowing what recording arts was. Because my mom's friend's kid enrolled in that for college, so I signed up for that, and then really loved it actually. Like when I enrolled in, but so we studied. A little bit of everything. Like we studied recording for mostly for music and mixing music, and then we also have classes about sound design, and then working, doing sound design for films. And it wasn't until the end of second year, a bunch of us decided to make a feature together. So we went to South China, and we just like totally sort of not knowing what to do. We just did it and came back and worked on the post-production by myself. And that experience just brought like a huge joy to me. And then when I was returning all the equipment to my professor, and she asked me what I wanted to do in the future, and I told her I want to cut sound for film. And she just she didn't take it as a joke. She just like sort of like suggested me, like, if you really want to do it, why don't you go to Hollywood? Like I was back in studying like undergrad in Beijing, and so that inspired me to apply for film school. And then I became, I applied for a bunch of schools, and I got into USC, and I became major students actually. And then so right after I got into USC, I remember it's the first day of class. We were sort of like for USC that you have to take, for the first year, you don't have any choice. You have to take all the classes. You have to try out different roles. And I just wanted to do sound. And on the first day, I was chatting with one of our classmates, Jesse Roseman, who is also a sound editor right now in LA. So he asked me what I wanted to do again. And I said, I want to work on, I wanted to, I want to work for Pixar, I told him, because I really love Pixar movies and want to cut effects for that. And he's like, you don't want to work for Pixar because they don't work on their own, they don't really do their sound there. You want to work for Skywalker. And I was like, where's Skywalker? I never heard of it. So cut to, I really never heard of it. So after a couple years later, I got an interview from Skywalker, and that was 7 years ago, and I got an internship there, and then after internship I stayed, and it's been a pretty crazy 7 years. I got the shortest history here, but it's been great because I started as an intern and then as apprentice, and that got me into the union. And then I was on my way to become an assistant editor, and so I did a dialogue assistant, and I did effects, and then I was on my way to kind of doing trying to figure out my own track. And then all of a sudden, I have a few friends in China they started a new animation company, and they are making like a Pixar quality animations, and they really wanted to work with me. And then all of a sudden I was like a sound supervisor while I was still doing all the system work. So that's really overwhelming, but I did 2 features with them, and I also mixed the feature in Beijing. Like, it's just, life has been really crazy. And still, like, after that, supervising job still came back, and then I did a little bit of assistant job, and then now I'm pretty much still like every job I got right now is all different. Like, I was cutting Foley for like Captain Marvel, and then I was cutting sound effects for Toy Story. Like, it's all very different, and I did dialogue editing for some Chinese features too. So yeah, that's basically my story. It's still going.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing. It's really interesting to me how many people, especially women, I meet who come out of film school and are saying, what do we do now? Now what's going to happen? And I have to say, I don't have a very good answer for that usually. It's nice to hear that you guys all had a not dissimilar experience, but all succeeded to a great degree that you have. And I wish there was a way that we could have open enrollment to jobs for everyone, but I guess that's the hardest part, is actually having jobs to give to young people. I was interested for each of you to say, if you can think of a good answer, a film or a art or something that inspired you. And it can be your own work or someone else's work, or a great success that you had with something that you worked on that you're particularly proud of, or maybe it was an innovation. Midge?
Specifically sound, or I know when I was in
I think more about your career. It
Just
doesn't have to be sound.
yeah, I mean, I think I didn't go to films a lot. It was like discouraged in my family. It was always go outside and play, And when I was a kid, I don't feel like I saw The Sound of Music and knew all the songs to that. But besides that, and but I was in college, and I took it was like Italian and something cinema, and well, maybe French or something. And I saw Alain René's Night and Fog, and it's about the concentration camps, and it even makes me cry thinking about it now. And it's I think it's about a 45-minute film. It was so overwhelming and so powerful. I think I had a nervous breakdown, and I just thought the power of film. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but I think eventually that just got to me. And I saw these wonderful films in that class, and it just kind of, I think it got under my skin. And actually, that's really interesting because it ends up that it is a documentary, and it's really the voiceover and kind of the music, but this voiceover that just plays like very normal as you're seeing these horrific scenes of, rooms full of hair and just terrible stuff. And it's just somebody, talking like in a typical, educational kind of film or something. And it was really has a lot to do with sound, I think. Yeah. Well,
Do we have films like that today, do you think?
do we have them? I mean, I think that I think we have amazing. There's a lot more like documentaries that are out there. I think that's good. I think we have a lot more access to them. A lot of people can put things down and say. A lot of us go like, oh, bemoan the fact that things aren't in theaters as much, and that there is a lot of crap. but I think also,
Is that new?
Yeah. No, but I really think that there's amazing. I think there is some amazing documentaries. That is a work of art. But I think that there are some. There's what's the film that just came out? I didn't get to see this one, but recently a friend saw the one about the Syrian. Is it Sama or? But I've seen. I just can't think off the top of my head. But I think there are really some great documentaries that we see.
What inspired me? I didn't ever take a class in Italian cinema because I was sort of brought up with it. My mom was a single working mom, and she hates it that I tell this story like this, but I got dragged to every movie because she couldn't really afford a babysitter. So I think I was 12 when I saw, Last Year at Marion Bad and L'Avventura and La Notte and, so I always had a strong sense of cinema. I always loved it. We went to the movies a lot. And also, like Midge, I was really an art history major, and I was very drawn to that. And I thought that's where I would wind up in that world. And I think in a way it was a great background because I feel like I always had a strong sense of sort of space and composition and how to look at things and then how to listen to them. And I think it's one of the things that when I started doing sound, because I think one of the questions we were talking about was like, what surprised you? And what surprised me about it and what inspired me was seeing the effect it had, early movies that I saw and what the soundtracks could accomplish, and certainly voiceover and music, and then later, early Scorsese films. And I remember sitting in a theater watching Raging Bull and thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's really...
I think that was most people's reaction
It's
to that
exact.
film.
No, but it's like the soundtrack is telling the story because that's what it's all about. It was amazing to me. And it's also, it has great impact because there's also very, very little music in that movie. It's just the soundtrack of that life. And that inspires me. Seeing other people's work inspires me. Your work always inspires me. And, I also did a lot of dialogue editing for a long time. And the work of these people inspires me. And that I love that Chinese puzzle of it and creating those performances. I was telling a story earlier about, I also teach it at UCLA, and I'm like in my 25th year now, I teach sound design. And I always begin by telling them the production track is the backbone of that's your sound design. And I was the dialogue editor on Terms of Endearment. And watching and working with Richard Marx, creating those performances. There's one amazing scene with Shirley MacLaine, and it's a one-shot long camera pan, and there's about 35 or 36 different pieces of dialogue tracks, which you well understand. And that performance was created like that. And that just, that's inspiring to me. It blows my mind. It's so creative and amazing. So.
Wow. My job really just inspires me. Like for instance, this week I finished a harp film by a very experienced director, but a new feature director, a very promising new feature director. And there was a scene where there was a father who is feeling this incredible tension and kind of breakdown of a wife who passed away and a child who has learning disabilities, and is a nonverbal has nonverbal issues. So. At first, when you watch the scene before we did the sound, the guy looked like a real jerk because he was like, just stop it, to this little girl. And at one point I was talking with the director, and the director said, I don't want the audience not to sympathize with at least some portion of his character. And so we added a little bit of Foley, and we added a little bit of what they call stimming, which is kind of like a repetitive kind of a verbal, non-words, but sound. And it was quite disruptive to the father having a conversation, and just that little noise in the background and the fidgeting of that character completely changed your perspective of this father who looked like a complete jerk, and now you're going, all right, he's being sharp, but he's going through a lot. Like that's a major narrative difference. And it was 100% done because of sound. So I feel like I get inspired every time I actually get a rough cut, you know what I mean? And they don't have any sound and it is just the backbone. And you're going, I remember in the beginning of my career, I was terrified by it. I was like, oh, I can't work with this. And then like the more I work and the more tools that I develop, I think of all the possibilities. And then I get really excited to get to know the filmmakers and the producers and the people in the room to learn what their vision is and how they want to craft the story. I almost feel like I don't really know the narrative until I have that conversation, because so much of it is crafted by the sound and so much of it can be very changed from a very visceral level from sound. The very next day I'm working on a lovely show, shameless plug, Hintified on Netflix, coming out soon. And it was a wonderful episode. And it was a situation where as a whole, they wanted to, it's shot in Boyle Heights, and they wanted to make sure that it was just a full environment. They wanted it to feel that the animal of Los Angeles and Boyle Heights to be the environment that affected these characters. When you looked at the rough cut, you did not feel that presence of Los Angeles. You felt the noise in the production track, which was there. Oh yeah. But it was a constant, and there weren't moments for the carbis, there weren't moments for the Wallach. It didn't craft itself around the narrative so that it was a character and a pressure and a familiarity, a comfort, and also something to overcome in some ways, and then something to lean into for support. So to me, I get inspired every time I have those opportunities.
Wow, how do I follow all that? I don't think, I'll just pass the mic now. I have totally, we were actually talking about it briefly earlier, where I said, a few years, not just a few years ago, but a while ago, I was ready to get out of the chair because I wasn't really experiencing the inspiration that you're talking about, And then I got a few opportunities to work with some very creative and collaborative people, and it changed my perception of what inspiration is in sound. And it really is storytelling. It really is developing the sound for the story. Like the sound is really important, and it is it, but it's really how you integrate that with the story to make it work. And so it kind of flipped my thinking, and now inspiration is the project that I'm working on. And it could be, I come from a very different world. It could be a really low budget documentary, and it's not the project's fault that it's low budget, It still has a story to tell, and it still can inspire me to do the work that I do. So I think it's really important also to know that the inspiration cannot be manufactured except for with yourself. You're responsible for your art at the end of the day. You can't blame the budget. You can't blame the director. Yes, occasionally you can blame the editing and the shooting or whatever, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, you're responsible for your craft and for your own inspiration. Until you actually acknowledge that, you might be hitting that wall every day. But then when it clicks and you realize, I'm responsible for this. I'm responsible for the inspiration. No one else is going to drive that in this room but me. And when you know that, you have your inspiration.
It's power.
It's power.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Deborah, you can follow that now.
Okay, well, let me think about this. Inspiration, well, growing up in a city where you can go see movies. I remember being very impressed by, like, Rossellini, Open City, all those. First time you go see it when you're, a teenager or whatever, being impressed by how you connect. I wasn't a very verbal person growing up, so the idea of, I went to a lot of, theater, musical theater, all this, and it was just a way of being able to hear the words and feel the emotions in another way. I was inspired very much by a mentor I had. Her name was Zina Voynow. She was Eisenstein's sister-in-law, Sergei. So she, Russian lady. And in life as well as in how she told a story. And working in 16 millimeter, we were talking about 16 millimeter. I remember one project in particular, and it was, it was a documentary, and it was telling the life story of, it's about aging and people, and kept watching, and I kept saying, she was cutting very, very roughly, and I was always sort of looking to make everything work immediately. And she just had this way of going through hours and hours and hours and hours of footage, and in her rough cut had the heart of a story or a human emotion, or it was just amazing to me how you can find in image and in sound. And the other part is learning when you were picture editing to leave room for sound, because you need that moment to feel something other than just words and images. It's I don't know. She was my inspiration for a lot.
Okay. Wow. So my inspiration, I'm always inspired by a good story. None of my family is in this business, and they're all doing different things. And I remember my grandfather was a really great storyteller. He was a tailor, but he has all these awesome stories. And I just remember as a kid, he would just set us down, like me and my cousin, and then he would tell the story, and I can remember the feeling. You're like, he's telling not always like a very happy ending story, but it's like always like you're leaning forward, you're trying to get the story. I think that's what kind of inspired me to be a filmmaker, because it's not only you are kind of like if you think about it, if you're a filmmaker, you're watching this movie over and over, you're watching the story over and over again. It's not only a good story, it's also you're part of it. You're having a relationship with this story, and you're contributing to it. And I guess it's just like a good story, and then just the fact that we could work on it inspires me to work on it, like continue working on it. Yeah.
I think a lot has to do with collaboration for me also.
Collaboration.
Yeah, you get inspired by, working with people who collaborate. It's a very special feeling when you're allowed to be part of that.
We're all lucky to be part of a collaborative effort. Every movie is a collaboration of tens to thousands of people. I always feel very lucky to be one of those many. I was wondering what, we were talking about this the other day about movie theaters. Well, a room of this size, many of us have been to movies in this size room throughout our lives, but we've also been to the really big theaters, and I don't think we were saying how much longer will the big theaters last and persist, and really you could say film itself in the style that we're used to seeing it in will probably change pretty soon. It's already been changing, and I was wondering if anyone would like to take on that sticky subject. Well, Netflix, I guess you might as well say it.
Yeah. This might just be a different take on it, but some people say, it's like, I want people to see my movie in a theater. That would be great, or at least grade 5.1 or a big screen or something. But I was thinking about it in terms of sound. It's like, because people are watching things on smaller and smaller screens, the sound becomes more and more important because it brings the emotion. And if you can't get that extreme close up, or you can't quite get the feel from that, like sound, it means sound is going to be that much more important. So I feel like our jobs are really important. I don't know if everybody gets that. I mean, that's the sad part, of kind of the frustrating part, or whatever. Do people understand it's why I wanted to do this movie? But so I do think it's that I love going. I have a feeling for a long time. It's just like now they're doing things where you can go and get meals and everything, drinks and everything. I think they'll do it like that, and there'll be a lot of us who still want to go to the movies. It's still one of my favorite things to do, and so I think that's what's happening. I think we're already in the middle of it, but I don't know if it's going to go away completely. I really don't think it is, but maybe after, or a generation goes away soon, too soon. But anyway, that's how I feel. It's like I feel like it will be a long time. I feel like there'll be there are less and less movie theaters, yes, but I think our job's more and more important. People know that.
I hope so. And I do, even though I might personally think all the best stuff is on television, but I think people will still go to the movies and have that big experience. I hope. I think they still see it as a big night out, and it's the way to experience it, especially with the theaters now and the 5.1 and 7.1 and Atmos, and you can't quite duplicate that in your living room, even with surround sound and 70-inch screen, whatever. I want to go back just for a minute, though, just about the inspiration thing and about Italian movies. I love teaching, and of course, in the course of trying to get them to understand how it's such an important part of the storytelling, I also show them a lot of openings of movies. And I wind up showing them, all the stuff we know about, and of course, Raging Bull and Private Ryan and City of God, which I love. And because in that moment, in those openings, the filmmakers give you basically so many clues. They pretty much tell you what the movie is about. And it's just this wonderful opportunity for the filmmaker to let you in on it. So I try to get the students to understand that. And one of the things I remembered from having watched so many foreign movies is then at the end, I show them the opening to Fellini's 8½, which is a masterful moment of sound design, 60, 70 years ago, has nothing to do with technology, has nothing to do with Dolby, excuse me, has nothing to do with it except the storytelling, the imagination, and the creativity. So that, I think, will never go away.
I agree that films are going to be, they're always going to be an event. I don't think it's going to go away. That's kind of like saying, hey, we have amazing concert DVDs and Blu-rays and, streaming concerts of, has anybody seen that Beyonce Homecoming? That was pretty awesome. It was fantastic, right? Yeah, but I don't think that's going to keep me from going to see Beyonce. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, I'm still going to go. They might need to blow it up a little bit more when I go to the theater, but I think the theater is still going to remain, valid. It's still going to be, significant. But what's also is there's this dichotomy going on with digital streaming and television right now. It used to be that television was quite compressed and processed after the mixer was done in these kind of local distribution networks, and what you would see based on where you would live was actually different. Well, what you would hear from where you lived was actually different than what somebody else would hear in another region based on the signal chain of mastering that would occur in distribution, and it would really affect your mix, and it was quite sad. Very, very sad. Very, very sad. And we used to try and do a bunch of, I remember back in the day trying to mix in a way where it wouldn't hit their processors, or try and come up with ways to, it was such a dance. But the wonderful thing that is happening, whilst the terrible thing that people are watching things on their iPhones and stuff, which bums me out. And, I'm getting all kinds of notes from producers that are like, I listened to it on my earbuds in an airport and it sounded a little, and I'm like, dude, yeah. So, I was like, let's just back up. But there's a wonderful thing that's happening where, like, even Hulu is now is streaming 5.1, and there's now Atmos streaming that is occurring. There's now variable bit rate streaming that's happening with Netflix, which is increasing the quality. They used to degrade the audio but worry about just the picture. So that's a thing. So I think that it's not all bad, like it's just moving, Yeah, exactly. The audiences are smarter.
I actually agree with Karol. It's not all bad. And actually, movies will not be going away. People want to see and feel that big, huge experience. They don't necessarily always want to have it in their home. What's really awesome for people who work in this field is that they're just creating content, more and more and more and more content. And they need more and more and more people to create good stories and good content and good audio and good sound. So for me, it's been awesome for my little slice of the pie. And it's because people are more and more telling stories, more documentaries are getting viewed in different ways. it's just spurring more and more awesomeness in our industry. So yeah, I hear you when you get sad about the movies and maybe some movies or movie theaters are going away, but stories aren't going away. The content's not going away.
I think the experience in a movie theater is different, is changing. And not that it will go away, but I think it's not quite the same experience. And just recently, last week, I was away having a reunion with people I've known for 50 years. So, we went to hear some people talk, and these were kids who wrote about their parents, like Alex Styron wrote about her father. And they talk about this resource of letters that were written. And there's a relationship somehow in my head about the fact that, people don't write letters anymore. So not only is it not the experience of reading a letter, but you have nothing to go back to and discover. And this friend that I saw this past week just got a whole bunch of letters that her mother passed away, and she just got all the letters that she had written as, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, and she really wrote letters. I never did, but she did. And there's this history of what she felt at the time and all that. And there's just something I relate to in when I was young, going to the theater, and maybe it's just because I was young and I'm going as an older person, but I feel like the experience is different. You come and you come for dinner and watch the movie. It's like the movie theaters are becoming more your living room, a big living room on some level, as opposed to, I'm not saying it's bad, and certainly.
And your living rooms are becoming movie theaters.
And your living rooms are becoming movies. So there's a little bit of a loss, that's all, of experience, but it's not less, it's just different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like people are having more options now. I took a trip back to China last September, and I was amazed that on the subway everyone's watching something. Some people are even holding two screens at the same time so that they can watch this show, and then while they can still testing, people are even kidding, and then all of them, like to my all of them are actually all listening to whatever they're watching, so like sound is still there. But I feel like now it's just people have spending more time on their screens, and they have more options. If you feel like people are watching shows, they're not going to theaters, it's not true, because in China, like last year, I think it's probably has the highest box office. Like people still go, they can watch their show on their way to go to movies, and they switch over to the movie and watch another format. So I'm really optimistic about it, and yeah.
I think now there are more movie theaters in China than there are in the rest of the world.
Yeah, and they're still building it.
Yep, they build
so
a
many
theater every
theaters.
minute, apparently. Mm-hmm. And more Atmos theaters in China than the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Hats off to you guys.
Big a living room, so they have to go. They go to their
The
movies
house
for the
price.
night.
Yeah, the price is very high, so it's not likely you're gonna build your living room into your. But people are having like more and more like home Atmos theaters. Yeah.
It's interesting that, at least in my experience, in my time in New York, where we had so many modest movies, mostly in New York, there weren't very many big movies. And the kind of movie that now would cost $20 or $30 million in those days costs $5 or $8 or $10 million. And Deborah and I worked on so many of those movies, as we all did. I'm sure you guys all worked on more modest movies. And the studios are not supporting those movies anymore. However, Netflix and Apple and Amazon are all over that category. The bigger shows that are more like movies are all being done at the streaming services now, which is really fantastic. And so many shows are being done. There's such a proliferation of work, which is great for us and also for young people coming into the industry. People ask me this question quite often, so I'm going to ask you. It's a real putting on the spot type thing. I never have a good answer, so I don't expect you guys to have a really good answer, maybe. What is your favorite film? Either that you have worked on or at large, anyone. Any film? It's a tough one, I know.
I have two. The two films that I really like that I worked on was the last one before I got into the union was called Imagine John Lennon. And it was a documentary, and the sound wasn't fabulous, but we had access to the Lenono library. And I didn't really know John Lennon. I knew the Beatles, but I didn't. And getting the inside, like the life of, someone like John Lennon and realizing who they were and Yoko Ono and all that stuff, that was really cool. And it was just the whole experience of it. And then also taking these things and realizing, like it made me realize something. We couldn't, the sounds of those crowds that are so iconic, like screaming, and it totally blows the everything just kind of cracks up and it's just like all broken up. That sound, you can't really replace that because that's what we remember from TV and everything else, because it just like totally blew just blew the lid off. And so that was interesting, and trying to make those stereo because everything was mono. And but that was just cool because I learned a lot, in making that film, and also, and it was a documentary, interesting. And the other one I think was I really liked Crimson Tide that I worked on because I thought the performances, Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington, were just like amazing just to watch that kind of thing. And here it is, a movie that and it was up for an Academy Award, and it was just, and also that they're underwater all the time. And I mean, your Academy Award for Hunt for Red October, but it's just like, how do you get the tension in there? And it was just like, it's always metal kind of creaking and whatever. It's really interesting. But then when they'd have like they'd kind of go head to head. It was like everything would be mixed down, because it's all about that, and so you're always kind of following what's the most important thing, and it's always story and their performances. But one of the things that made, because at the time we were cutting, I loved cutting both dialogue and effects on things, not just one, or, just not doing like one person's car throughout the whole movie, but so we'd do both dialogue and effects. And I remember seeing that they had, and that was on a stage. They did, and so you could hear the plywood, and so imagine them walking around, right? And so you'd have to take the feet out as much as you could, because you wanted to leave every breath in there that you could, but you didn't want it to sound like they were walking on plywood and this is a stage. So it's just like, but it was just so fascinating to keep the performances. And the other thing I have to say that I love, and I'm just going off here because I'm figuring we don't have very much time, but I just want to say that, I tell my students, it's like, I do love cutting effects. If I had to cut one thing, maybe it would be effects. But dialogue, when you have to realize that some of the most important things, as we're saying, it's not the dialogue, but it's the breath. And when you think about it, actors all study breath and, how to breathe and actually what they're doing with their bodies. And it's like, we know exactly how somebody feels when you hear their breath. If it's shallow breathing and they're nervous and they're, oh my God, I don't know what I want to say, or, oh, I'm so excited, or sad, and you just hear it. And so we don't know, I mean, you don't go around saying, oh yes, that is what's happening, but our brain, we just know it in our gut, like how somebody feels, like how they really feel. So those words don't mean as much as what's the vocalization, how are they breathing? And to get into that kind of level of stuff is so wonderful, and it also makes you aware of it in life, And so anyway, it's just cool, So I just liked working on things that had great performances, and they weren't very many, the films I worked on. But and just those performances. Sometimes, I mean, I would cry every time I'd see scenes or whatever. The other thing I just wanted to say was I don't know why people, if people are here and if they have specific questions, but it might be fun to open up
Some questions.
once we go down for questions.
I have a bunch of favorite films. So I always say I have 4 or 5, and Bicycle Thief is in there, and Rocco and His Brothers, and also Lawrence of Arabia. And I just want to comment because I don't think any of you were old enough to go then. But when my mom took me to see Lawrence of Arabia, and we dressed up and we went to the biggest theater in St. Louis, and there was an overture, and my students don't even understand the concept of that. Like, what? There was music playing, and then the curtain opened, which I think is part of that magic of that theatrical experience. And you're not going to get that in your living room. And I have a couple of favorite films I worked on. And the kind of, if I can say this, the girl in me, I loved working on Top Gun because it was a whole lot of fun. And I wound up doing all the jet stuff and then creating the animal library for it, whatever. And this isn't quite right, but then the artist in me, my favorite film was Witness, because I had been a big Peter Weir fan, and I also read the script. I got lucky enough to read the script, which is really important for us to do, because that's where you start getting inspiration. And I could hear it the whole time, and I loved that. So I was so excited and really honored to work with him. And it was a great experience. We had a great time. And then he asked me to come up and do Mosquito Coast for him, and I couldn't leave Paramount, which was the yin and the yang of being committed there, which was great. But I feel so fortunate that I got to do what I do and did, especially at that time. Now it's harder. There's less time, there's less money. It's just tougher all around. So I just thought it was a gift. It was a great gift to be able to work on it and work with directors and be part of it and be part of the collaboration. And they paid you. It was amazing. So
I don't think I can pick something I worked on. Like, I'm literally sitting here trying to go through stuff, and I'm just in love with so many moments. Do you know what I mean?
well, I did. I also worked on Jimmy Neutron and SpongeBob, which are at the top of my list. I love it.
That would be on the top of my list, too. I just worked on a film this summer that I thought was really interesting, and I'm kind of in love with this moment. This director was really cool. It was for a series called Into the Dark for Hulu, and it was an episode called Culture Shock, which is a series. It's an anthology of feature films through Hulu. And it debuted on 4th of July, and it was by a director called Gigi Guerrero. And she was wonderful, from Mexico, or actually from Canada and Mexico and then Canada, and then. Her film it's a border crossing story crossed with kind of a Stepford Wives treatment, and it's got these moments where they put her in they go into like a spoiler alert. Sorry. So they put her in kind of a VR space, and one of the director's treatments in my world, I was like, oh, okay, so we're gonna make these two different sonic environments for this kind of idealized beauty Stepford Wife land, in this, and kind of scary, crossing the desert crossing story, and busyness of this area of Mexico, and chaos, and she kept coming up with these wonderful little details where it was in the environment in this kind of VR Stepford Wife world, where she would intentionally kind of loop a bird or drop the birds out or kind of make the backgrounds kind of, you know what I mean? Yeah, in order to kind of give you some type of idealized sonic symbol of beauty, but make it just a little manufactured so that it was super cool. Yeah, and I really liked that. And I also had that same experience working on a film called Director's Cut for Adam Rifkin, who did the Chase in Detroit Rock City. And it was kind of this meta film where this guy hijacks an actress and tries to remake the film. And so when you are watching the film as the original director made it, they wanted a very David Lynchian full style, and we did that. And then we cut to these little moments where it was supposed to be the guy in his basement splicing together his alternative ending of, and we would on purpose put his Foley out of sync on top of the other Foley, and you know what I mean, and leave like a basement verb kind of on the dialogue that he layers on, make all these like intentional mistakes that cued you into like the comedy and like the kind of sloppy amateur nature of this kind of person who had no clue. And it really, really kind of helped make his character dark and comical. Yeah, so maybe those two. I don't know. They're all awesome. Yeah, they're fun.
I'm good. No, it's okay. It is a really hard question. It's hard to pick my brain sitting up here. Like, I've had 3 people to go through, like, okay, what are my 2 favorite films? But I'd rather talk about what about a film really inspires me, or how do I approach sound. And pacing in the edit, and lighting and color are two big things for me. Music as well, but that's the obvious answer. But for me, the pacing of the cut and how it's put together, how the story is put together, and the lighting and the color. Matter of fact, I sweet talk the color master out of the colorist before I do my final mix if I can, because it really inspires me to feel the spatialness of the mix. So those are two major things that drives me when they do that. And two films that I worked on that I can specifically say that was it was one was Let the Fire Burn. That I was totally from found footage, from archival footage. So in that case, noise was everywhere. So noise became the palette. Noise, I added noise. And the dialogue editing, that was when I fell in love with dialogue editing. That was the time when I was like, oh, this is painful and awesome all at the same time. It's great. And then recently did The River and the Wall for Ben Masters. And that really helped me because the spaciousness of his photography was just outstanding. And so it just helped me try to create these worlds. Wanted to make me even build them bigger. He delivered it entirely MOS, which was not fun, but fun all at the same time. And he was totally on board with Atmos mixing for a doc, which was awesome. So we got to really create these worlds, these big grandeur of Texas going down, the river and everything. And so it was that was a really neat experience. But space, color, but pacing is huge. Pacing really inspires me.
Thank you.
This is a question I don't answer either very easily. So, but I think there's a difference between what is my favorite movie maybe that I worked on, or what was my favorite experience, because they're often different.
But it can also be your favorite movie.
Movie in general. Well, I also love The Bicycle Thief, and there's some old movies like that. But I would just go with a lot of the experience, and films where circumstances where you can be able to laugh and contribute and have a voice are really, really nice. I mean, I feel really lucky. I've worked on some very good films, and I mostly work with very good directors. And, it's an experience. It's not something you could tell a story about. It's just having experienced it. So Silence of the Lambs, which we worked on together, for example. One of the ones I laughed on most was with Mike Nichols on Birdcage, and I've worked on his films. It just worked out that, the first time in the studio together, and I, as I said, was very quiet for most of my life. But there was something in that room that allowed me to say whatever came to my mind. And, we just giggled through the whole thing, because also all the actors were reliving their moments on set. So that really was fun. I don't know. There are many. I don't have a favorite.
Well, my answer is always changing. So the way I answer that question is just to list all the movie out, and then which movie I would pick to watch tonight. So I really love documentaries. So I'm really enjoyed working on this. I cut effects and little dialogue on this documentary it's called Looking at the Stars. It's a documentary about this special school. It's a ballet school. It's teaching all the blind kids. It's in Brazil. And so they're teaching little kids how to dance, like all the blind kids how to dance ballet. And the main teacher there is also blind. So everything's through, she was blind when she was 12 or something. So she learned ballet through touching and through other people showing her, and she memorized all that. And she's a beautiful ballet dancer, and then she's now teaching all the little kids how to do it. So the whole documentary followed her about her day, how did she get to work, and how did she teach the kids through the touch. And then we cut a lot of Foley for that movie but then you wouldn't really notice it. I guess the reason I like it is just first it's the story is really touching, and then and also it could be invisible in documentaries. You cut so many layers and nobody would notice it, and that's the great part. And another movie I want to talk about is Toy Story 4, which is I cut effects on that one. the reason I picked that one is it's really a dream came true because I, like what I said, I really always wanted to work on Pixar movies, and I got to work on Cars 3 as a Foley supervisor. But it's just like I wanted to cut effects only to, this is the area that I'm like have most fear of because I don't really get exposed a lot to. So like when I was asked to be one of the effects editors, I was overwhelmed. I was so excited to do it. So like, and it's a really great animation too. So yeah, that's like those two movies are kind of my pick of tonight. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, questions? I'll come back there. Yes. Shout it out. I'll tell them.
Hello, my name is Adam. I'm a filmmaker. I'm doing it like for the past maybe 15 years. I have two basic, really rudimentary questions. Okay. First question: scene to scene, what do you look for sound? Meaning, how do you approach every scene? If it's going to be an action scene, if it's going to be a quiet scene. By the time it's cut, what are you looking for from that mix? It might be very broad. It's something that I struggle with. And the second,
Oh, go ahead. No.
Hold on. Let's do that one first. So, how do you approach the work specifically?
I'm going to give it to you too.
Oh, no, please.
I'm gonna give you a quick response, which is, what's the scene about?
Yes.
In other words, what's the story you're telling? I mean, that's always the answer. We have some basic approaches we use, which is that, or at least I do, and I think a lot of editors do as well. We often cut backgrounds first to give you a sense of time and location and place, whatever. And it starts to kind of build the architecture of the film, and start giving it some structure and energy. But it's always about what's happening in that scene. What's the story you're telling?
And that you echoed exactly what I was going to say, but also one other thing, because this actually happened to me with a new filmmaker, where they cut a car scene and they wanted a really, really wide, expansive sound to their car chase, but they shot everything mono. Do you know what I mean? Like that everything was, or we're behind the car, we're looking at the car this way. I couldn't design things wide to match the picture because there wasn't anything going by. Does that make sense? So I think in addition to the cut and this narrative, the script really, the basic story tells me what I want to explore and what I want to look for. But it is true that you can shoot things and cut things in a way that will prevent you from being able to make something very wide and large and chaotic, and kind of force you into a more mono space. So I would say, as a filmmaker, maybe make sure you ask yourself, as you're going through your cut and your narrative, what type of sound you think would enhance the narrative from a script level, and then from that, create sequences that enable your sound people to be able to design something to enhance that emotion.
So I got it. Part two.
And we do just think, I mean, a sound person, they are thinking, like, the first thing you think of with that slug line is, what's the background? So what's the ambience? And sometimes it's more important than other times. And then it's like, what are the effects? Like, what is happening in the scene? And so is the dialogue the most important thing, or is it something that they're doing? But it's also, what's the plot point? And one of the things we have to do is, like, and a lot of times we use metaphor, but, like, what is the plot point? And a lot of times the plot point is not the car crashing or the door opening. It's somebody realizing something. And then what do you do with that? And then it's like, oh, the baby cries next door, somebody drops something in the kitchen, that kind of thing. And we really are thinking. And hopefully it's not something so cliche that the audience goes, oh, Jesus, there's that dog again. But instead it's like, you feel it in your gut and you don't even know why. I show your scene a lot, in No Country for Old Men, when he finally gets the money. What's his name? He's under the tree, and it's like, is this the money? Is this the thing with the money? And the case opens, and it's under, and there's no music, and we see the money, and then I'll say to everybody, they go through, and the students will say what they saw and other stuff. Did anything happen when he's found the money? No. And then we go and we watch it, and there's just a big, because it comes right from the scene. There's a wind blows through a tree, and it goes just like a music cue, but it's the effects. And as effects people or sound people, we're trying to do that along with that it doesn't always have to be the dun dun or the music, the more subtle music. I'm sorry to any music people. I don't mean to offend.
You a car crash.
Yeah,
If you want to
exactly.
see the head of the character,
So it's
maybe the car crash
yeah.
isn't significant. You might
Yeah.
see a big ass car crash
Yeah.
and really just hear like just a whisper of it.
Yeah. So there was a woman whose hand went up first, right there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name's Joanna Fang. I'm a Foley artist, and I'm 28, and I've been shooting Foley for the last 7 years. Thank you. But the question that I have is mostly pertains to giving back to our community of filmmakers at the university level. Both of you teach undergrad sound, USC and UCLA, and I was wondering, like, what was that moment? Because I'm fairly young. I know I don't want to, leave my career right now to go teach, but at what point in your life did you realize that you had to have a teaching component to give back?
I mean, I just always loved to teach, so that's what I did. But, you can start doing it now because I'm telling you, there's not enough people teaching about sound. And when they hear you, especially everybody loves Foley, right? So, but just to do a lecture, just offer, like get in touch with someone at the university. I mean, I'm sure Skip knows somebody, but anyways.
Well,
and
that would be me.
Yeah, exactly.
I teach at NYU and
No, because it's so satisfying and it's so fun. So you can always do something. I mean, even during my super busy, time in working in sound, I taught I tried to teach a night class. I couldn't always do it, but that's how I started it, as just an adjunct doing little things here and there and lectures or whatever, because you have so much knowledge. I mean, everyone here in the film industry, you can give back so much because they just don't, they're just starting from scratch.
I mean, I would say the same thing. It would be great if you're on the Foley stage, call the schools or call any organizations, or the student films always need someone to help them do the work. Do a demo on the Foley stage because it's hard for people to even understand why you're doing Foley, or like why the footsteps should be different, or why the high heels should sound aggressive or sharp, or the footsteps should sound quiet and tentative. Those are really important things, and you can share that easily.
One thing I do is I associate with different universities around my studio, and we end up working on several of their higher level student films. And so in that way, you can mentor. You don't always have to teach in a classroom. There's lots of different ways to mentor and to help other people get, achieve what they want to achieve in their craft. And you're right, we do have to give back. So, but there's lots of different ways to do that, not just by formal education.
Last question. Anyone? Yes?
When you're watching films, can you get lost in a movie, or can you still see things and see that it's manufactured?
I did have to stop watching a TV show recently because the lack of Foley was very distracting.
Opposite answer of the question.
But I can't get lost though.
Yeah, I'm a good audience. What happens with me is I get into the movie. What happens is in the first 4 or 5 or 6 minutes, I kind of know if I think it's a good job or not, and then I don't worry. It's like, oh, great, and then I'm just in the movie. And then someone will ask me, well, was it a good sound job? And it's like, yeah, I think it was good. There's some movies, right away, like, just because it comes to mind a year or so ago, Moonlight. I mean, I sat there and the whole time it's like, oh my God, this is such a great job. I almost couldn't, so I had to watch the movie again. But we're just good on it.
Yeah, I have to say that when people ask me, it's like what sound? You know, I walk out like when they ask like how was the sound? It's like what sound? When it's a really good thing, I have to go back and look at it to see. When it's a good movie, then I want my students to see it, so then I'll find some sound that's good. But the other thing is, what I will not go to a movie, or I'll turn my ticket in if I'm going to be late, because think about this. Usually, it's the sound that comes out before a frame of picture. You're still seeing the credit, you're still seeing the producing, the studio, whatever, and it's really sound that kind of sets the whole tone for the movie and what's happening, and you kind of lean forward like, what the hell is that?
It's like when you watch a horror film.
Yeah, like the next time you want to, like, you can tell something evil's going to happen, you want to turn your head, lock your eyes, and just hit your mute button.
What's really funny is my kids no longer will go to the movies with me because inevitably I'm sitting there going, damn it, turn on the sub or something that bothers me, and I just can't sit there knowing that I just spent, $50 or whatever and not hearing it the way we should hear it. But other than that, I'm an avid, immersive, I'm in the film. I'm very focused and I'm a good watcher. But if I'm in an environment that's not good, whether you're talking behind me or the it's not speaker out or something, then it's all over for me. It's all over, and they don't want to be around because I go tell somebody and they get embarrassed.
I will talk. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you all very much. You guys stand up and take a bow, please. Great job. Thank you very much.